Welcome to the second day of the ETSAP workshop. This is session 3 on modelling approaches. My name is Paul Dodds, and I have the pleasure to chair this session, and we have 3 talks. The first talk is on SATIMGE-2020 by Bruno Merven of the University of Cape Town. If you have any questions, then please put them into the question and answer box, and we'll try to take them at the end of each talk. And we'll have about 20 minutes for each talk, including questions. Okay, so over to you, Bruno.
Hi. So just setting up here. Okay, thanks. Hello all, and thanks for the opportunity to present at this ETSAP workshop done remotely, which is great because then we get to attend it without having to fly across long distances. So I'm Bruno Merven, and I'm an energy systems modeler, part of the energy systems research group here at the University of Cape Town. And in my presentation, I'll be talking about SATIMGE-2020, highlighting some recent improvements that our team has made to the modeling framework we use here at UCT for energy systems modeling. So at the core, SATIMG is made up of SATIM, the South African times model, and SAGE, a dynamic recursive CG model that we run in conjunction. And we've recently expanded the framework with waste value submodels, where the IPPU is now integrated in the times model. So we run the model iteratively to test energy and climate policy. The GDP comes from sector GDP, and household income comes from the CG model, which drives the useful energy demand in the energy model, from which we get the least cost technology mix, and then we pass back to the CGE, the production function for the different sectors in the power sector, expenditure on the power expansion, and tweaks some of the energy consumption behavior in the households. Then out of that, we get the technology mix. So there's a few iterations until we get convergence on the GDP trajectory. And then we get the technology mix, the least cost technology mix, and the emissions, and also some socioeconomic indicators. So here's an example result of the framework. On the x-axis, we have the CO2 EQ emissions in 2030, excluding land. And on the y-axis, the GDP loss for a set of scenario relative to a reference point. And in each scenario, we're running 2 sets of scenarios here. One where in both scenarios, we're imposing a cumulative cap to 2050, and we're reducing that carbon space available to the model, and then seeing kind of the impact it has on the CO2 EQ in 2030 and the GDP impact. This is without energy efficiency, and this is with more optimistic energy efficiency. So now, having kind of introduced more or less what SATIMG is about, I'm going into some detail about some recent improvements that we've made, starting first with some improvements to SATIM, which is the times model. So we've done a recalibration. Our model was calibrated to 2012, and this year we were calibrated to 2017 energy balances, and also to the 2017 GHG inventory. On the transport sector, we recently disaggregated the freight sector, adding more detail on the freight. So we have more detail there on the different freight vehicles, and added some extra technologies, hydrogen fuel cell, the freight sector. Electric vehicles were there, but we've added them also in some other modes where we didn't have it before. Another recent improvement was the addition of the use of hydrogen in the production for steel. So these are improvements to some highlights of recent improvements in the times model. And we have some improvements to the link model, where I've been the most involved in the last year and a half, 1 to 2 years. So our previous framework that when last time we presented the link model, we only had really the power sector linked. So the power sector was linking on the production function of so this is how the power sector is represented in the CG model. It's got intermediate inputs and value add inputs of capital and labor. So we were previously linking on this part here, the intermediate inputs, the mix of fuels required to produce electricity based on the results from SATIM, and also the capital intensity. And then now we've recently added a link to the labor intensity. So that's a recent development. And then the other development is that we're not just linking the power sector now. So before, the electricity demand was coming from the CG model, and we were just running a power sector model. Now we're running the electricity is an endogenous outcome of both models, and driven by, in the energy model, we have the fuel mix, least cost fuel mix or technology mix to produce the different industrial commodities. And we pass that information to the CG model in terms of the production function, so the fuel mix required to make steel in this example. So we do this on the demand sectors as well. And the demand for steel then is kind of linked to the economic activity or outcome of the CG model, which goes back to the times model. So the demand for steel is coming from the CG model. The times model computes the fuel and technology mix, and that's used to refine the production function in the CG model. So at the end of the day, we have kind of a synchronized energy and economic model. This is showing an energy balance, more or less, for different fuels: coal, electricity, natural gas, petrol and diesel, across different sectors. And in blue, we have the economic model, and in orange, the times model. And it's not perfect, but it's much better than if we had no link at all. Another recent improvement was on the consumption function of the household in the CG model. So we have variator with big differences in household income. So this is showing for the 10 best income deciles of South Africa in 2012, what the consumption basket was made up of. So for the lower income, it's mainly about food, and then in the higher income, it's other services. So the energy goods are down here. So we're now mapping so this consumption basket is now linked to the absolute income of the different deciles in the CG model. So as the absolute income of the different deciles, so as, for example, the absolute income of decile 3 starts to look like the base year income for decile 4, the consumption basket starts to look like decile income 4, etc. And this we've tested this on the transport sector, where we're allocating budgets based on the base year expenditure on transport fuels for private transport. If there's a fuel switch occurring in private transportation, we could model things like rebound. So if the households were to keep their original budget allocations to transport fuels, this is what it would like. And if they actually reallocated the savings from switching to EVs to other goods, this is what the demand for passenger private transport energy would look like. Other improvements that we made this year, so I mentioned here addition of waste and volume, IPPU now is part of the times model. The waste and the volume models are sitting outside in spreadsheets, but the drivers come from the framework, and the results go back to the framework. The other improvement we made this year was taking into account the COVID impact. So this is showing the electricity demand. We've got here the actual electricity demand, and we also have some historical projections made by the IRP, which is our planning process for electricity. And this is our latest projection here. And then the other recent improvement was using the Tableau framework for storing and visualizing results. So this has some advantages here. For example, we're able to compare different data sets. So we've got in the same data sets, we've got the results from the SATIMGE models, which is the CG and energy model results in one data set. And then we have the inventory data set and the energy balance data set. So we're able to combine those different data sets. For example, here doing a comparison of the CO2 emissions for different IPCC categories between what's coming out of the model and what was in inventory. So that's one nice thing about this framework. And then the other nice thing is the ability to have multiple zoom levels. So this is in GHG emissions for the main IPCC categories. And you can kind of zoom in all the way down to the technology level. So going from energy combustion, energy industries, power sector, coal, gas, right down to the power plants within the same framework, and then kind of zooming in and out. Here showing the same information at 4 levels of zoom for IPCC categories, and all the way down to the different technologies we have in the times model. The other nice thing of this is you can have dashboards made up of multiple indicators. So here we have a dashboard looking at the power sector where we have capacity, new capacity, production, investment, price, emissions, demand, emission intensity, all in one place. So this is on the results side. And then the other thing we did this year was to move the model to a Git. So the SATIMGE framework relies on GAMS code. So we needed to move that to keep that on in the Git framework to be able to track, because there's several of us working simultaneously on the same model for multiple projects. And so we had to move that code onto Git, and we also experimented with moving the actual model, which is looking quite promising for tracking versions. So we use the IMP files from Answer, and they actually, the Answer reproduces the IMP files in very similar structure. So it is able, when you're comparing IMP files from one version to another, you can pick up easily differences between one version and the other. And this has proved to be quite useful in this last project, where we were 5 or 6 of us working on the same model at the same time. This is something, a bit of a work in progress. So our times model is on the temporal details quite aggregate. And so we're not seeing things like curtailment, and we're not sure about the adequacy of the system that we're coming up with. We kind of put in training wheels, and then so what we've started doing now is to expand the capacity of 2030 or 2050, putting that through a high resolution dispatchable production model, and then kind of feeding back to the energy model. We haven't automated that link yet. We're just making adjustment to the training wheels. At 2030 horizon, which was our main focus this year, we haven't had to make too many adjustments, but now in our next project, where we're looking at net zero for 2050, 2060 for South Africa, we'll be using this more extensively. So just peeking a little bit under the hood, looking at some detail of how all this works. So we have some GAMS code here, which is the main code. We have some spreadsheets with scenario levers on there, which goes into the code. This runs the CG model, runs the times model. The times model itself has a link to a demand model. The times model leans on a whole lot of sector-specific Excel workbooks, which are based on energy balance and other data sets. The GDP stuff drivers go to the waste and volume models, and then it collates all the information in one place, dumps it in one big CSV file, which is sucked up by the Tableau workbook, which also leans on the sets and maps workbook to aggregate to different levels that we want. Just showing here how this is done. So we have here a table listing all our technologies in the times model, and here we have two two groups of aggregators. We have a energy balance based aggregator, so sector, subsector, subsector, and then the IPCC categorization. And kind of Tableau manages those links, which allows us to do this, to zoom in and out. So that's what we've got so far. So next year we're moving into a new project looking at net zero for South Africa using the framework. We also have a project looking at climate action impacts on households and further deep dives in various technology sectors. So this is the team. I've put here some links to some of the projects, and I'm showing the history of the framework from when we started back in 2003. And then some further references here. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Bruno. That's great. That's a really sophisticated system I think you've built. We have 3 questions in the chat, so I'm going to go through those quickly because we don't have very long. We have 2 which are about the system itself. So one from Antti saying that the model is solved iteratively between times and SAGE, and how long does it take to converge in terms of the number of iterations and the total time to solve? And maybe I could add, are there any times when it doesn't converge?
We haven't had the issue of non-convergence of this up until now. It's 3 to 5 iterations, and we're running the times model annually to 2035, but we're quite coarse on the time slice resolution, so we're able to run the full times model in about 1.5 minutes, and then the general equilibrium model takes about 30 seconds, so it's like 2.5 minutes per, and then the waste and F volume models takes a few seconds because it's reading and writing to Excel. So it's about kind of 2-3 minutes per iteration, so 15 minutes per scenario. Yeah.
That's very fast. And Gildas asks, is there any work of adaptation of times results before using them in SAGE and vice versa? To what extent do you do post-solution processing?
Yeah, so to adjust the production functions, we have to calculate from the results that we get from the times model. So we have to convert the results that we have. So we have the fuel consumption per unit of output of the different sectors, and that's used to modify the production function in the CG model.
Okay.
And then for the CG model, yeah, we're getting the CG model is much more sectoral. It's based on the input-output tables, which has much more detail in terms of the different sectors. So we have to kind of aggregate up the sectors into the energy balance sectors that we have in the energy model.
Okay, thank you. And one final question from Brian about the results of the model system. So yeah, I think you're finding the slide. That slide there, yes. Saying including the rebound effects appears to have a very significant impact on projected passenger transport energy demand. Was this a surprise, or did it reflect what you anticipated might happen?
Yeah, this was a surprise, and I never run with this full rebound. We kind of at the moment more leaning towards this side where kind of the savings experienced by the households are reallocated to other goods. This looks quite extreme, but this is what we get when we allocate exactly the same budget as our base year.
Yeah. Okay. And one related question from Tina about what the theoretical background is for modeling those rebound effects.
So the theoretical background is that we're using Cobb-Douglas function here for the households, where they're allocating the same budget or share of their income to different goods, and we have a new sector that we introduced, which is called private transport sector, and that sector consumes petrol and electricity to produce passenger transport. And so we have based on the base year consumption of petrol, we have the base year consumption of private transport. And then as we get a switch from petrol to EVs, then that sector follows what's happening in the energy model and switches, which with electricity being much cheaper than the fuel and the efficiencies being higher, then we get a lower cost per unit of private transport. And if the households carry on allocating that the same budget to then that's the result we get.
Well, thank you very much, Bruno, for answering all of those questions. A fascinating talk. So I'd like to move on to the next talk now, and I'm very pleased to welcome Anjali Jain from the Malviya National Institute of Technology in India.